In Acts 10, Peter had a dream. He saw a sheet come down from heaven with all kinds of unclean animals in it. He heard a voice tell him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." He refused, but the vision was repeated a total of 3 times, telling him to kill and eat the unclean animals that he had been shown. We're told that Peter was perplexed by the vision. Why didn't Peter understand immediately? Was he too dense or something to understand the obvious? Wasn't God telling Peter that he was abolishing the dietary laws that he gave to his people back in the Torah, and that he wanted them to start ordering their honey-baked ham for the holidays? Or was there a different message the Lord wanted Peter to take away from the vision? There's a very important dream in this week's Torah portion. Could understanding its interpretation be the key to unlocking Peter's vision? Let's take a look together in this week's 5-Minute Torah. Welcome back, Torah Tribe. You're watching the channel that connects disciples of Yeshua to the eternal Torah of God. Please do me a favor. If you find this video valuable, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your family and friends. This week's Torah portion is Mikeitz, Genesis 41:1 through 44:17, and here are the 3 things that you need to know about it. Number 1, Pharaoh's dream. Last week's Torah portion ended on a cliffhanger. Joseph was still in prison and the royal baker had forgotten all about him. This week, however, something happens that jogs his memory. Pharaoh wakes up one morning disturbed by a set of dreams he had. He demands that someone interpret his dreams, but no one can. When the baker remembered that Joseph had interpreted his dream, he tells Pharaoh, and Joseph is released from prison so that he can appear before the king. Pharaoh asks Joseph if he can interpret dreams, and in true humility, Joseph confesses that the interpretation of dreams is something God does and not him. However, he's willing to listen to Pharaoh's dreams and ask God for the interpretation. Pharaoh tells Joseph his dreams about the 7 fat cows being eaten up by the 7 emaciated cows, followed by his dream about the 7 heads of plump grain being eaten up by the 7 heads of sickly grain. After hearing Pharaoh's dreams, Joseph immediately knows what they mean and advises the king on how he should respond to the dreams. This leads us to number 2. Number 2, Joseph rises to power. Joseph tells Pharaoh that there would be 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of terrible famine, and that God had given Pharaoh these dreams to prepare for these events. After listening to Joseph's advice, Pharaoh basically says, "Yeah, you're right. I'm going to put you in charge to make sure all of that happens." So Joseph goes from the lowest low to the highest high, becoming second only to Pharaoh himself over all of Egypt. Literally overnight, God positions Joseph to not only be in a place to reunite with his family, but also to be the savior of the known world. And number 3, Joseph's brothers. After the 7 years of abundance are over and the 7 years of famine are well underway, Jacob sends all of his sons but Benjamin to Egypt to buy food. When Joseph's brothers arrive, he immediately recognizes them. However, they didn't recognize him. It had been many years and he wasn't the adolescent anymore that they had sold into slavery. It probably didn't help that he looked like an Egyptian and spoke like an Egyptian as well. I wonder if he walked like an Egyptian. Quickly, Joseph concocted a plan to test his brothers. At first, he treated them cruelly, even accusing them of being spies. But he blesses them by secretly giving back all of the money they had used to pay for their grain. His brothers return to their father and they survive on the grain for some time. Eventually, however, they have to return to Egypt for more, but this time with Benjamin, as Joseph had required of them, and they are lured right into Joseph's trap. We're left with another cliffhanger in this week's Torah portion, wondering what Joseph's true motivations and plans are as he tells them that he's taking Benjamin as a slave. I love books. As you can see, I have a wall of books behind me. If you search the internet, you can find books on any subject you can think of, except for one, discipleship. You may be thinking, wait a minute. There are tons of books out there on discipleship. Yes, there are many books available on how to make disciples. I just haven't found many that explain what it means to be a disciple of Rabbi Yeshua. This is why I wrote The 4 Responsibilities of a Disciple. Where most discipleship books work to answer the question, how can I make disciples? This book works to answer the question, how can I become a disciple in order to make disciples? I know what you're thinking, but everyone who believes in Yeshua is a disciple. Well, while that should be true, the fact of the matter is, it's not true. Over the centuries, since our Master walked the face of the earth, we've created billions of converts, but very few disciples. If you want to transition from being a convert or a fan of Yeshua to becoming a disciple of this man, then you should order your copy of the 4 Responsibilities of a Disciple and have your life transformed. Order today using the link in the description box below. Before I get into this week's commentary, I wanted to offer a big apology for last week's video, The Grand Illusion. There are multiple instances where I meant to say Judah, but said Jacob for some reason instead. I'm sure this caused confusion for some people, and I'll try to work harder to avoid mistakes like this in the future. This week's Torah commentary is called Dreams and Visions, and it comes from my book, 5 Minute Torah, Volume 3. Our Torah portion begins exactly 2 years after Pharaoh's cupbearer was released from prison. If we remember from our previous portion, both the royal cupbearer and the royal baker had been thrown into prison because they had displeased Pharaoh. One night they both had troubling dreams and told them to Joseph, who interpreted them. Joseph interpreted the cupbearer's dream as a message that the cupbearer would be restored to his position within 3 days. Joseph said the baker's dream, however, signified that within 3 days he would be executed. Both of these dreams came to pass just as Joseph had interpreted them. When the cupbearer was released, Joseph asked him to put in a good word for him with Pharaoh. The cupbearer forgot, however, and exactly 2 years after Pharaoh's cupbearer was released from prison, Pharaoh woke to a disturbing dream of his own. In fact, 2 parallel dreams. Pharaoh's first dream was that he was standing near the Nile and 7 plump, fat cows rose up from the river and began grazing nearby. Then immediately 7 other cows who were emaciated came up out of the Nile as well. Rather than grazing alongside the first 7 cows, they ate them instead. Pharaoh awoke, but fell back to sleep and had a similar dream to the first. He saw 7 ears of plump, healthy grain growing on one stalk. Then immediately he saw 7 more ears of grain that were withered and diseased that sprouted up and consumed the original healthy ears of grain. Pharaoh was quite disturbed by his dreams. He knew there was significance to them, but didn't know what they meant. So he, quote, called for the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. This is Genesis 41, verse 8. It was at this point that the cupbearer remembered that Joseph had been able to interpret his dream. He told the king about him, and immediately Pharaoh sent for Joseph. When Joseph was brought before Pharaoh, he interpreted his dreams as a warning from God that there would be 7 years of plenty followed by 7 terrible years of famine. Joseph recommended that Pharaoh put someone wise in charge of Egypt's food supply so that they would be prepared for the hardship during the years of famine. The king put Joseph himself in this position, making him the most powerful man in Egypt alongside Pharaoh himself. In the apostolic scriptures, we have a similar incident related to dreams that occurred with the apostle Peter. In Acts 10, Peter goes to the house of a man named Simon, falls into a deep sleep, and then has a dream. In the dream, he sees something like a sheet come down from the sky that has all kinds of animals in it that the Torah strictly forbids God's people from eating. But then a voice tells him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." However, Peter replies, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." The voice then responded, "What God has made clean, do not call common." This happened 3 times before the sheet was taken back up and Peter awoke. The book of Acts tells us that when Peter awoke, he was, quote, inwardly perplexed as to what the vision that he had seen might mean. This is verse 17. Within Christian tradition, the interpretation of Peter's dream is obvious. Stop following God's laws regarding food. You've been freed from the restrictions God placed on you to signify you as a holy people. Now you're just like everyone else. If it wiggles, you can eat it. God has given you a smorgasbord, a virtual buffet with no limits. Your calling of holiness has run its course. But there's a problem with this interpretation that no one seems to want to address. What if Joseph had used the same method of interpretation commonly used on Peter's vision in interpreting Pharaoh's dream? It would probably sound something like this. What does it mean, Pharaoh? It means God is telling you that from this point forward, cows will not only be carnivorous, but cannibalistic as well, and will have to begin feeding cows to one another, because if they don't eat meat, they'll be emaciated and wither away. And as far as the grain is concerned, they will gain the ability to eat and need to consume their own kind as well in order to be able to survive. We know this is a ridiculous way to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. Dreams are not literal. They use objects, images, and themes to represent deeper concepts. Just as Joseph knew Pharaoh's dreams to be a warning about the impending famine, Peter understood his dream as a warning as well. He eventually understands its meaning, and as he enters into the home of a non-Jew for the very first time in his life, he provides the interpretation himself, saying, quote, "God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean." This is verse 28. He goes on to say, "Truly, I understand that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, anyone who fears him and does what is right is acceptable to him." This is verses 34 and 35. This was the reason Peter was shown the vision. It had nothing to do with food, but everything to do with people. It set the stage for the new frontier of the disciples' mission among the Gentiles. Rather than avoiding contact with Gentiles, which was normal for religious Jews of Peter's day, he would need to embrace them and teach his fellow disciples to do the same. We always need to keep in mind that God's word doesn't change because of a dream or the misunderstanding of one. The standards God revealed to his people in the Torah have not been repealed, and God's standard of holiness doesn't disappear simply because we believe it to be out of fashion. No, Peter's dietary restrictions didn't change, nor did his strict observance of the Torah. The radical transformation that took place, however, was that Peter's arms were spread wider to embrace brothers and sisters he never knew he had. I've got a question for you. After hearing my take on Peter's dream in Acts 10, what are your thoughts? And does this affect anything for you? I would love to hear what you think. Leave me a message in the comments below. I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful Hanukkah and learning what it means to shine your light in this dark world. Be sure to check out the second video in my series, One Word, right here. And if you missed last week's video, you can check it out right here. I'll see you again soon with another Messianic insight into the eternal Torah of God. Blessings from Emet HaTorah.